Военные же думают по-другому, не как политики. Сосредоточить все американские силы на Иране – это оголить Дальний Восток и дать Китаю свободные руки. Первое, что сделают китайцы, когда американцы сосредоточатся на Иране, свернут голову Тайваню. Американцы ничего не смогут сделать. Американская армия не способна вести две войны средних. Большую, с трудом одну. И поэтому у Китая будут развязаны все руки на Дальнем Востоке, а это меньше всего идет американцам.
Hello and welcome to another chapter of the Plain Truth 12 channel. This is your host Luke. Now this is an impromptu one. A lot of military information has come to light and drastic military moves are being made, so I could not resist doing a video today. Essentially what is going on, and I'm going to break it down into pretty much two parts, being a focus on the United Kingdom and its military moves in the United States and its military moves, though both coalesce and revolve around one another. But I do want to first and foremost remind people of what happened in June, and many people are already aware of this, that a classified Ministry of Defense document was left at a bus stop. Now, I might clip a video at the end as a kind of comedy output on how this works. Any classified document that is found somewhere has been leaked by government. Now, the reason why they're doing this is to encourage a certain culture or a certain political rhetoric in the media. Now, essentially what this document highlighted was an intent of the United Kingdom to send out its naval destroyers, its Royal Navy Type 45 destroyer HMS Defender, and it was to put this destroyer in disputed, quote-unquote disputed waters around Ukraine. Now, in expectation that Russia might respond aggressively. Now, the waters they send it in is pretty much Russia's. Now, and what happened was Russia sent out its its jets and its military ships, and it ran the UK out of the waters. Now, shortly after that happened, we had in the news that Matt Hancock was found on CCTV kissing his mistress. Now, personally, this is just a personal view of mine, that was used as a sort of distraction away from the military embarrassment of that situation. But the reason why I wanted to start on this, because it's now deciding the military culture of the United Kingdom, and essentially it is being revolved around, again, like an old Cold War narrative, the West versus Russia/China, but it's now including Iran. But Russia is the big bad enemy in label, but it is not Russia that this was going to be centered around. Now, to move forward on this is a comment made by Boris Johnson in recent news, and this was in August 2nd, about what has happened recently, which involves Israel and Iran. But let's get it from the Prime Minister's own words. Fair use.
I think that Iran should face up to the consequences of what they've done, accept that the attribution that the Foreign Secretary has made, this was clearly an unacceptable and outrageous attack on commercial shipping. A UK national died. It is absolutely vital that Iran and every other country respects the freedoms of navigation around the world, and the UK will continue to insist on that.
Now, essentially what this matter is about is what I'm going to move on to now. The US, UK and Israel blame Iran for ship attack. Tehran denies. Essentially what has happened, right? A ship was attacked by a suicide drone and 2 people died. One was a British national. Now, Israel immediately blamed Iran for what had happened without providing any evidence. Israel then, because a British national died as a result, Israel then called out the British government to basically condemn the Iranian government for this attack. Initially, the UK had no response. It did not say anything, and the reason It did not say anything because it was, one, it did not want to get involved, and two, they already knew it was it was just a sticky situation to get in. But as stated by Mr. Boris Johnson there, the official narrative now is that Iran did it, but yet no physical evidence has been provided to show that Iran was responsible. Now, the reason why I wanted to do a video today is because the war towards centered around Iran is rampant. It is increasing at a very exponential rate, and the reason why I say that is because of two things. The first being this comment made by North Korea. Focus on Brexit. North Korea blasts London provocation as UK sends its largest carrier strike group to Asian waters. Now, I first started out by highlighting this military document that was left at a bus stop, which stated that the UK sent out its warships to provoke Russia. Now, there is another one being sent out permanently, somewhat permanently, to the Asia Pacific. Now, essentially, the North Koreans claim that Britain is desperately trying to restore its declining status, but says its plan will only cause strong opposition from other countries and may inflame an already tense situation in the Asia Pacific. Now, the South China Sea is pretty much where the next war is going to be centered around, in terms of, at least on a maritime level, because it is a disputed area. In a basic summary is China claims it as their own territory. The international community do not accept it. The US, the UK, and everyone's involved trying to stop it. What you'll see in the South China Sea area is China building artificial islands, military islands that they can store various ships or jets around or anything like that. So it is being militarized. China's been building bases out there, and the US is trying to counter that by stationing weapons in the country, such as the Philippines, Vietnam, South Korea, and Taiwan. Now, essentially how this situation is going to unravel is around Taiwan, because as stated in the clip in the introduction, is that Taiwan is pretty much the last leash that the United States has in that area. And the reason why it is so important, because in any war with China, which will involve China, the United States and its allies will need Asian countries to store military equipment there. Now, the United States and the recent general that they have now, I can't remember the man's name, but he's making round trips around those Asian countries, asking them to store certain ballistic military grade weapons and all sorts of things in their countries. But many, I don't think any have agreed to it yet, because of the message it sends out to China. And China is all about putting pressure. In recent news, China put pressure on Australia because Australia was saying that they were responsible from the recent pandemic going around. So there is a geopolitical shift that is going on around the South China Sea. But again, it also involves Iran, because the United States is going down the path of a Rome, in that it is trying to fight multiple wars at once. They're trying to hold it down in South America. They're trying to hold it down in the Middle East, even though they're pulling out troops, but they're still trying to center troops around there to keep the Iran affiliated organizations at bay. And it's also trying to keep up a pressure against China and Russia. It's too many wars they are fighting at once, and it will not be able to succeed. Now, moving on to the United States, and it's primarily the reason why I wanted to make this video. The US large-scale military exercises cannot scare China, Russia. Global Times editorial. Now, the US has begun 2 large-scale military exercises. The first is a joint Indo-Pacific military exercise led by the US Indo-Pacific Command, with the participation of Japan, Australia, and the United Kingdom. The other is the large-scale exercise 2021, held by the US Navy around the world, and is reportedly the largest naval exercise since 1981. A US military scholar told media that it's intended to demonstrate to China and Russia that naval forces can simultaneously meet challenges in the Black Sea, Eastern Mediterranean, South China Sea, and East China Sea. But but China and Russia are not falling for this. They know the United States cannot fight two-pronged wars at the same time. Now, the reason why there's been a spurt in military activity on the part of the West is because of Russia's and China's new innovations. Russia has recently unveiled its S-500, I believe is what it's called. It's anti-air ballistic type of technology where it can basically shoot ballistic missiles out of the sky. And essentially, and China, I think, if my memory recollects properly, is now invested in new technology in the maritime pursuits. So China and Russia are making big moves militarily, and the United States is somewhat lagging behind. I think Russia has now unveiled new jets. It's crazy. There's like an undercover arm race that's going on, and the United States, to be quite frank, is losing it. Now, to further reinforce that claim, because I'm not just talking out of my rear end, in this recent war game that the United States do, because they do many simulations regarding any future war that they want to get into. Now, and this was only recently in last October, it failed miserably. After Wargaming lost, Joint Chiefs are overhauling how the US military will fight. In a fake battle for Taiwan, the United States forces lost network access almost immediately. Hayton has issued 4 directives to help change that. A brutal loss in Wargaming exercise last October convinced the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General John Hayton, to scrap joint war fighting concepts that had guided US military operations for decades. Without overstating the issue, it failed miserably. An aggressive red team that had been studying the United States for the last 20 years just ran rings around us. They knew exactly what we were going to do before we did it. Now, this is essentially what I hope people realize. The US is a declining superpower. It's fighting too many wars at front, and it's relying on old traditional warfare technology. Now, essentially, what happened in this simulation, the US relied too heavily on its communications, and in this war, Russia and China have, what's the word for it? The EMP type technology where they can wipe out the communications. Now, as soon as this simulation commenced, that's exactly what happened, and they reduced the United States' communications to 0, and then they just ran rings around them, essentially. Because people need to realize this war is away from home. The United States needs to send out aircraft carriers and warships into the South China Sea, and it needs those aircraft carriers to refuel. If it can't refuel, it can't send out jets. The main problem with any prolonged war with China or Iran maritimely, regardless of nuclear weapons or anything like that, the United States aircraft carriers are its liability. If they get knocked out, it won't be able to sustain a fight. This leads me on to my next article. Here is what a war with Iran would look like. Now, in this article, it pretty much highlights, and there's another article that I could not find because it was from quite a long time ago. It was a UK general who highlighted in any war with Iran, it will require 1 million ground troops, because you cannot rely on just overwhelming air power and ships. Because if Iran, in fact, I'm going to leave that to the next article, but let's just read this. The 2003 invasion of Iraq has cost the United States more than $1 trillion, in addition to the deaths of at least 4,887 US troops and at least 206,000 Iraqi civilians. Of course, the nature of these questions is speculative. War is not as predictable as dominoes. They are dynamic events that can change the entire course of conflict. As of now, the numbers rest somewhere between 2 strikes estimate and a total apocalypse. Now, this is where the information that I wanted to get through. The entire active duty US Army and Marine Corps today totals a bit over 600,000 troops. That is not enough men to invade Iran. Even if you mobilize the entire National Guard and reserves, you would not feel comfortable invading Iran with a force of that size. He said that, adding that it's hard to speculate about casualties and costs. What will be needed for sure is a draft. And now, if you're not aware of what a draft means, it means getting civilians into war. Now, essentially, the point is, and every military general knows this, is why Trump had the opportunity to go to war, but by my recollection, he had about 20 minutes to make the decision, and he said no. because they know a war with Iran will cripple the US economy, it will cripple the US military. And if the United States pursues a war with Iran, it would have to solely focus on Iran. If the United States solely focuses on Iran, everybody knows China will invade Taiwan. Nothing will stop that. China will increase its geopolitical strength instantaneously. But now to conclude on this final point, and this is what is giving the West so much anxiety, because this has not come out of nowhere. Iran and China signed a 25-year cooperation agreement. Now, essentially what this results in, China and Iran, both subject to US sanctions, signed a 25-year cooperation agreement on Saturday to strengthen their long-lasting economic and political alliances. Relationships between the two countries have now reached the level of strategic partnership, and China seeks to comprehensively improve relations with Iran. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was quoted by Iran's state media as telling his Iranian counterpart Mohammad Javad Zarif, "Our relationships with Iran will not be affected by the current situation, but will be permanent and strategic." And this pretty much is going to encompass China involving Iran on what is known as its Belt and Road Initiative, which is a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure scheme intended to stretch from East Asia to Europe. If people are not familiar with the Belt and Road Initiative, essentially a bunch of, I say a bunch, that's putting it lightly. It's the way of China increasing its geopolitical reach, investing in all sorts of infrastructure projects across the world, and it's encompassing many countries, and it's pretty much doing many countries a favor. It is speculated that China is trying to put people into debt traps, but I think China is more intelligent than that. It is about making friends and long-time agreements at the expense of the United States declining reputation in the advent of Mr. Biden, who is not making any friends at the moment. But in conclusion, the way this world is moving is that in the next few years, and even possibly sooner, is that there is going to be a war which surrounds the South China Sea and Iran, and the West is not ready for it. The UK will not be able to sustain it, neither the US, neither Germany, nor Australia. It is quite known that if this war were to break out, it will be a world war. Many countries will be involved, because it will not be contained so easily. That's why people are shuffling around it. But again, I am no military professional. I am just a curious soul. And the way this is going, many US generals themselves, UK generals, and many political commentators know that any war with Iran or any war in the South China Sea will not be good for the West. So many people may be asking, why is this continuing? For various agendas and whatnot. But this is the way of the world. This is what's happening. I wanted to make this video, and I'm going to keep abreast of what is going on, because a lot is going on. It's progressing at such a fast rate, and since Mr. Biden has been in office, it can only increase further. But again, thank you very much for joining me on this one. And it was an impromptu one, but I thought it was necessary, granted, with what's going on currently in the world. But you know how it goes: wars, and rumors of wars.
Are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq, and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. I said, is it classified? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me.